We gather this hour.
We gather this hour.
We gather this hour.
We gather this hour as people of faith.
As people of faith.
As people of faith.
As people of faith.
With joys and sorrows.
With joys and sorrows.
With joys and sorrows.
Gifts and needs.
Gifts and needs.
Gifts and needs.
We light this beacon of hope.
We light this beacon of hope.
We light this beacon of hope.
Sign of our quest for truth and meaning.
Sign of our quest for truth and meaning.
In celebration.
In celebration.
In celebration.
Of the life we share together.
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 We share together.
We share together.
We share together.
Yes.
So, thinking about July 4th, Independence Day, this wonderful holiday in America, I was thinking this week, there's this narrative about America that I'm sure that you have encountered sometime in the last year, or certainly sometime in the last half decade, as it seems to ever increase. It's this narrative that America, that the United States of America is a deeply divided nation. It is a powerful narrative in that it describes what many of us are feeling as we read or watch our news or scroll through the social media feeds. I have even heard it claimed that we are now more divided than at any point in our history. I still remain skeptical of this. Even a cursory grasp of US history would likely show deep divisions more often than they show actual unity. In my lifetime, the closest I've ever sensed something close to actual unity was in the days and weeks of sorrow and pain following 9/11. But whatever nascent unity was emerging at that time was quickly and perhaps inevitably splintered at the onset of the wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Still, I am curious about our seemingly fractious nature, always wondering how we actually keep this country together, how we become one out of many, e pluribus unum. That motto, that phrase, I've always heard that, it means out of many come one, but I've always heard that, as out of many people, one nation. But perhaps it's better heard today as out of many stories, one story. In our Mill Creek DNA, our values, beliefs, and mission, we name story as part of our core beliefs. And we state this, we say, we believe in the power of story to understand ourselves in the cosmos and in the continual process of creation. And we design intentional spaces for people to tell those stories with the expectation that those stories will change us. And then also in that same document, our values, beliefs, and mission, we note a core value, and we put it this way. We say we engage the stories of religious peoples to understand how others have wrestled with their own lives and their own contexts, and how those stories inform our lives, and to understand, this is important, to understand that every person's experience is valid, true, and extremely limited. So core to our religious mission here at Mill Creek is this idea of narrative, of story, because we know that it is in story that we locate and understand ourselves. It is in story that we locate and understand others. And we acknowledge that these stories are all valid, true, and limited. And also embedded in this acknowledgement that we understand about stories is that there are many stories. Right? There are many stories, not just a single correct story. So recently, in a very recent essay in the Atlantic magazine, perhaps some of you have encountered this. If you haven't, let me do this real quick. I'm going to put a link in the chat box, and it'll send you to that story that you can copy that out and check that out later. But in this essay, George Packer distills 4 narratives. He says there's 4 narratives about America, 4 stories. And the headline of the essay, I'm always curious whether the authors actually get to write the headlines, because the headlines are always a little bit more provocative than the essay supports. But anyway, the headline in the essay claims that these narratives offer competing visions for this country, true, and are tearing us apart. I'm not sure, but maybe. The essay itself is challenging. I promise you, if you read it, it's going to be challenging for you, and I encourage you to read it if you get the chance. And I will bet that you are going to be able to locate yourself, your own understanding of yourself in America, somewhere in one of those 4 stories, and maybe drifting into 1 or 2 of the others as well. So you're going to be able to resonate with some of the stories, right? Some of the narratives, but there's also probably going to be a couple that enrage you. So I want you to do something as you read that essay. If you get the chance, if you read the essay, or even if you're just listening today, I really encourage you to pay attention to your emotional response. Be that response of something along the lines of, well, of course, that's exactly how this country should be. One of the narratives might tell you that. And then one of the narratives might say, are you kidding me? There is no way. That is not an America I want to live in. So there's sort of like these extreme ends, right? Completely, oh yeah, they've got that story right, or completely wrong. But just notice your response to that. Because it's the intention, it's the attention that you give to both what resonates and what repels you that is your entry point. As I say, it's your entry point to awakening. Now, I honestly can't do any justice to Mr. Packer's analysis. It's a fairly long piece. And he really offers in the essay really the good parts of each story, the bad parts of each story, and the really ugly parts of each story. But I will briefly describe how he breaks this into 4 narratives. So the first narrative he calls Free America. Now, Free America is grounded in the sort of libertarian ideas and consumer capitalism. It's freedom, and I think this is important. Its freedom is personal. It's about my freedom. It's not about a collective freedom. It's about my freedom to be unencumbered, to seek out my highest way of being, right? And Packer writes, Free America sees, quote, Americans as entrepreneurs, as employees, as investors, taxpayers, consumers, everything but citizens. In Free America, government and bureaucrats are the enemy. And in Free America, it generally distrusts all those old sources of authority like school, church, union, bank, media are all distrusted. So that's sort of Free America. And the second narrative he names he calls it Smart America. Now, Smart America is the narrative of the meritocracy, of highly educated, salaried professionals. Smart America believes that individuals should, of course, be rewarded according to their ability. And like Free America, the individual is of central value in Smart America. So that's what they share with Free America. But unlike Free America, Smart America believes there is room for government intervention to ensure that everyone has an equal chance to move up. Smart America believes in the institutions that give their meritocracy some stability, but they are terribly uncomfortable with patriotism. Packer writes at the end of his piece on Smart America, he writes that they have lost the capacity for a national identity. So there's a third narrative, and that one he names Real America. And this is the story of the quote unquote hardworking patriots. It's the working class, the farmers, the truck driver, often the soldiers and police. Packer writes that real America has always needed to feel that there's both this shiftless underclass and a parasitic elite that all depend on its labor, the ones in the middle working class folks. Real America tends to be religious, fundamental, evangelical, and also tends to be hostile to expertise, modernity, and intellectual authority. William Jennings Bryan, back in the early part of the 20th century, was a populist and sort of, as Packer would say, he's a populist in the real America vein. But he said this, I found this fascinating. He said, if we have to give up either religion or education, we should give up education. Real America is isolationist and nationalist. Purity and strength are valorized. One interesting note, following the 2008, there's a lot of anger in real America, because particularly following the 2008 financial crisis, the working class of real America saw their home values crash, their retirement funds evaporate, and all the pink slips started to arrive. And as George Packer writes, they noticed that the banks got bailed out and the bankers all kept their jobs. Well, the real Americans suffered. And while the economic recovery started to build and took place over a long time, the broken trust has never been restored. And then there's the fourth narrative that Packer writes, and he calls this Just America. Just America, he says, emerges from kind of the younger generation, say under 35, who have come of age sort of with the blinders removed. Despite the promises of America they were taught in school and at home, they can clearly see the injustices that have been embedded into this country, and how those injustices manifest themselves in things like extrajudicial killing and disproportionate imprisonment of brown and Black folks, and the ever widening income disparities. Just America's parents there, are largely in that meritocracy, and that meritocracy mostly saddled them with the stress illnesses from trying to get into college and the insane debt when they got out. They see real America's racism and religious purity harm people they love. And they have witnessed free America excruciatingly avoid the contradictions of individualism in an inherently interconnected world. Just America believes it's a narrative of truth-telling, an attempt to reconcile the inconvenient failures of the other three narratives. But for Just America, as Packer writes, he says, quote, the country is less a project of self-government to be improved than a site of continuous wrong to be battled. Just America doesn't deal with complexity very well and establishes a dogma that far too often fails to tolerate dissent. Now, that was very brief, but his four narratives are much more developed and nuanced than I can offer right here. And again, I encourage you to read it. But each narrative, I think, celebrates and elevates part of the American story. And each narrative has deep flaws that completely undermine it. In other words, each of these narratives are valid, true, and limited. So going back to my invitation today, it's in part to notice what piece of these stories resonates in your heart, in your life. Which of those stories do you connect to more deeply? For me, I know myself mostly in that narrative of smart America. That's kind of the meritocracy story is what I grew up in. And I have some deepening connection to that Just America narrative. And I know that my narratives, the story that I've created about America is insufficient. It's inadequate to the task of describing the complexity and promise that is this country. If the last few years, particularly the last year, has unveiled anything, it's the rich complexity of a country. So where I think we continue to fail is the way we have let these narratives become competitions Now, there are some that might say that embedded in our very human soul is this drive to compete and the incident drive to win, but I'm not interested in the game. I'm not interested in winning. Winning itself is a narrative that ends up being wholly insufficient. What I am interested in is the way that e pluribus unum, out of many stories, one story, how that sounds a lot like love. Not love as a victory, but love as a way of being in relationship to the stories we carry and the people that carry them with us. If we are to be awake and alive to love, if we are to be the invitation for others into that love, you and I have a mutual responsibility to each other and to the stories we carry, so that we may privilege the wholeness of all of humanity, of all of America, and all of humanity. Because it's in that wholeness that we find the freedom we have been promised, the freedom that I believe we being free America, smart America, real America, and just America, we all yearn for that freedom, a freedom that holds all of us, without exception, in deep regard for each other and this planet upon which we live. Amen, my friends. And I love you, and may we live in blessing.